Awesome. I think, before we sort of get towards the, end of the session, maybe open it up to any questions that folks had to ask. There is one thing that, even when we were discussing in the community what people would like to understand, they wanted to understand how do you sort of build a team, right? How do you equip a team? You spoke about training, skills, the contact center, the delivery person, right? All of these people who are engaging with the customer at different touch points have a direct impact, right? If the delivery executive argues with you, it's going to be a horrible customer experience. If the contact center doesn't get back to you, it's going to be a horrible customer experience. But at the same time, I think it's fairly well understood that the CX folks who are at the contact center, the delivery folks who are coming to deliver the order, they also often face the brunt, right, of the dissatisfaction of the customer, even though they probably had the least to do with it because the problem was somewhere else, that they probably didn't even have anything to do with at all. So on two fronts, right? One, how do you think about building team, training people, creating capability for operations excellence in this whole customer excellence and customer success space? And the second piece is, is burnout something in this space that becomes very, very important to manage? Is employee morale something that becomes very, very important to manage when, sort of working on customer experience?
So I'm assuming that the second part of your question is a bit more to do with specifically the delivery folks and the contact center executive.
Exactly. So,
The first
so
part of
that's
the
the
question
second part.
I'll answer in more in general, right? I think one of the definitions of customer experience that I absolutely hate is that it is the contact center, right? When you talk to a lot of people, when you say that you work in customer experience, their immediate question is, are you managing the customer experience center or contact center? It is a very critical part of the experience loop, right? But it is actually technically the last resort, which is that your experience was not right, so somebody had to come there and then their issue had to be resolved, right? So I would call it a customer experience rescue center and not a customer experience center, right? So customer experience is something which is delivered by the entire organization, which is what I said in the beginning, right? Be it any part of the organizations, and since we're talking about ops in specific, I think it comes back to measurement and metrics, which is surveys, NPS, all of that is esoteric, right? Which is that somebody will publish a number saying that our customer satisfaction score, in whichever way you measure it, is X and it has improved from X to Y. What I did to impact it sitting wherever I am, I have absolutely no idea, right? I think the first thing in terms of building teams is to identify those two or three metrics of customer experience which you are impacting, right? In that first mile experience example I spoke about before, it is basically allocation, right? And it's a term called regional utilization, which is how many of your orders are getting delivered from a warehouse which is closest to that customer. So that is a percentage number, right? And that is a hard metric, which is actually very close to customer experience, but is understandable, well understood, and can be easily explained to operational folks, right? So I think it's important to kind of break it down from an overall satisfaction metric to specific metrics people impact. Otherwise it becomes more conceptual in nature, right? And how to build teams around it, it is quite cultural, but having monitoring of these first identifying and defining these metrics and then monitoring these metrics is one way, definitely. The second is actually to think about adding one question in any kind of strategic or design questions that you're trying to answer, right? Which is, how is this going to impact the customer? I am not even saying the question should be, am I making the customer's life better? But I think a question should be asked to say, am I making it worse, right? And I make a change, and is this going to impact the customer positively or negatively? Is again something which should be part of the way we discuss changes, discuss improvements, and so on. These are two things which I have helped me in the past in terms of aligning the larger organization towards customer experience goals, right? Second part of the question, in terms of the burnout, it is difficult because the expectation, as you said, of that particular person is to resolve questions which they did for no fault of their own. It is the organization which has made some sort of error, or the customer themselves also, as we spoke. But they're the ones who need to figure out and manage this, right? I think the right resolution mechanisms within the organization are critical here, which is that if the contact center or the customer experience center has raised a particular issue, who are the partner teams within, say, the larger organization? Like, for example, payments failed. Now, uh, the customer has made the payment, they have not got a refund, it is basically stuck in, I don't know, some sort of ether limbo, right? uh, where it just disappeared. Now there has to be dedicated POCs within each different team who can answer these questions, which is how you manage it within the org. So in the payments team, there will be a person who says that, okay, these are the 10 payments which seem to have disappeared into thin air. I now need to dig deeper with the bank, with the payment gateway, to figure out where that money is gone and then return it to the customer, right? The thing with customer experience, solving customer experience issues, right? It is not a law of averages. It is not at an overall level, I'm going to solve this. Those are strategies, decisions, and all of that. Rescuing customer experience is a painful line by line job, which is that every line needs to be investigated and discussed, and the issues need to be resolved. It's the same case on the supply chain side, right? You will say that this packet is lost. The customer, we say we've delivered it, the customer says they never received it. Now there is no way for me to sit at a head office and decide what the answer there is. Someone needs to actually go ask questions, identify what has happened on the ground, and then resolve those issues. So those POCs in the respective parts of the organization are super critical.
Got it. So, I mean, I think my key takeaway from this is that, all of these design aspects, right, of how these different teams internally are talking to each other. And I think what you said very importantly, that the supply chain team or somebody who's packing stuff in a warehouse, right, the out process metric of on time in full delivery is vague, right? It's not something that they can directly contribute to, but they can contribute to ensuring that, they pack the right order, or that the supply chain team ensured that the right products were stocked in the right place. And
Correct.
it's really really about looking at in process metrics, and then instilling that degree of cultural expectation in the org that, hey, whatever we are doing, all of that ultimately goes ahead and impacts the customer. These are not disjoint. It's not vague. It's very very real, and it's very very meaningful in our community. As we were talking in the last few days, so somebody mentioned that they'd gone to rent a car as they were on vacation somewhere, and they both of them couldn't drive manual. They wanted an automatic vehicle necessarily. However, I think they'd made a mistake or something of that sort, where they'd actually booked a manual. So when they went to the showroom or the rental space, and they said ki, hey, aisa galti ho gaya, this is gone wrong, we can't even drive this car because we don't know how. They said that basically the store manager who was running it, he or she was able to very quickly check, okay, do I have an automatic car available? Okay, at a nominal additional cost or no additional cost, I'm just going to allot an automatic to you. It didn't require them to call 4 or 5 levels up and waste like an hour, 2 hours, or just argue with the customer saying, no, you've done this, so you have to do this, etc. Right? It was important for them. They recognize, right? Like, this is a really, really big part of the customer's holiday experience. They're renting a car for 30,000-40,000 rupees for a period of 4, 5, 6 days. And not delivering on this switch is going to be terrible. So I am empowered to make this decision. Sure, I will have to explain, send a note to management that, hey, I've done this. The system will take my record, but I can make this switch, right? So this is, maybe an example to maybe ground what Himanshu was saying, right? Like, that are people at different levels empowered to make switches, to make decisions within their sphere of influence that can directly impact customers.
Yeah. No, I absolutely think that you have to, right? I think that there are certain degrees of freedom which are required at every level. Can you make a decision that I am going to accept this iPhone return? Probably not, right? But can you make a decision saying that this 300 rupee thing actually arrived broken for the customer? Can I replace it? So there are degrees of freedom which are required at every level, and I think it is very important that people be allowed to make those decisions for the betterment of customer experience. Implementing this though is not easy at all. It again goes to a line by line understanding of what issues can come up, and giving the proper resolution, right? And sometimes it'll you'll get tears in your eyes when you look at the number of lines of SOPs which exist in a contact center, right? Literally, you will write about every issue. You will write about what is the level of freedom which is allowed and what is not allowed, and who is allowed to then take the decision on making this thing in on behalf of the customer, right? Now, identifying what is important to the customer at that point becomes critical, which is that, like in the example you mentioned, that manual versus automatic seems to have been a critical point, is a critical point in the journey, right? And that's what they've identified and said that there's a degree of freedom that I will allow. Now, if someone says that, hey, I want to get upgraded to a Range Rover, that is not a decision which is allowed at that point, right? So I think that freedom as well as the restrictions are both important, because otherwise you will not be able to control what is happening at that location, right? So it is, the devil is in the detail in terms of executing or doing something like this for an empowered organization. uh, you will get to say a 90% of all your issues, and you have those SOPs for the 90% issues. For the 10% of the issues, you create the next level, because the first level doesn't have the answers, right? They do not know how to deal with a particular issue. You deal the next level, who are a little bit more empowered to make creative decisions, right? You say that there is a certain amount of freedom, and I'm allowing you because you are more senior and I trust you to make better, to have better judgment. So you give a higher degree of freedom to that, and then there will be certain things which have to be approved by the CEO or the CEO, right? So I think it's about defining it at that level, and that needs to be done for this to actually work smoothly. Because otherwise, what will happen is that in one store, in the example you mentioned, in one store you will have that experience, and in another store you will have a different one, because it will not be consistent. It won't be a consistent experience if it is not documented. I think I gave the most boring answer to this, but that is the answer, right? Which is, you have to define the processes at that level, and it happens.
N- No, completely agree, right? I think we had this thing when I was at PNG that if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Or it doesn't happen effectively. And it's striking that so much of what I've seen on the shop floor in a manufacturing setup is very, very similar,
Yeah,
to e-commerce, to
absolutely.
retail, to all of these things. A lot of the cultural aspects, the process aspects are very similar, right? Even there, like you had a quality hold, you decide you have to scrap material. Okay, up to say 50,000 rupees worth of scrap, as the department manager, I can decide that, okay, this is bad product, let's get rid of it. Goes up to 5 lakhs, my boss needs to take a decision. Goes up to 50 lakhs, is the plant manager's decision, right? 5 crores, the supply chain head is going to be involved, is going to lead to very, very uncomfortable questions for why that's happened. So
Yeah.
completely understand that the escalation matrix needs to be built, and it needs to be built off of something real, which is understanding the data, how likely things are going to happen, and then what
Every issue.
losses
Yeah.
you can afford to also allow the organization to
Yeah.
take.